Let's solve the equation negative 4z plus 2 equals negative 12z squared. Okay, so we need to get rid of any terms over here to make sure the right side is equal to 0 and make sure that all of our terms are on the left side. So we need to essentially cancel this one out so we can have 0 on the right side. I'm going to start off by adding 12z squared to both sides. Now, keep in mind, those will cancel. That's great. These are not like terms, right? This one has z to the first power. This one has z to the second power. They're not the same. So the best I can do is bring it down. And don't forget to put them in the right order. Put z squared first, then z, then bring down the 2 and equal 0. That's called standard form. Squared, variable, constant, 0. That's standard form. Okay, we want it in standard form so that way we can factor it out and then use the zero product property the rest of the way. But you might notice that 12z squared minus 14z plus 2, they are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to factor out a 2 before I do anything else. If I divide 12z squared by 2, I'm left with 6z squared. If I divide negative 14z by 2, I'm left with negative 7z. And if I divide 2 by 2, I'm left with 1. And all that equals 0. Now, recognize what's happening here. Something times something is equal to 0. Okay, well, in other words, 2 is a factor of this entire expression. 2 is a factor. So I can eliminate it by dividing by it. But of course, you have to divide both sides of the equation, right? 2 divided by 2 is 1. More importantly, it cancels out. And it leaves me with this new problem, this 6z squared minus 7z plus 1 equals 0. Okay, this is a much easier quadratic to factor. Okay, so let's use the AC method. I need to multiply 6 and 1 together to get 6. So I need two numbers that multiply together to be 6. But when I add those numbers together, they add up to negative 7. Okay, well, 1 times 6 is 6. 1 plus 6 is 7. I need it to be a negative 7, right? I need to flip the sign. So I will change my signs, and now all of a sudden it works out. Negative 1 times negative 6 is positive 6. But negative 1 plus negative 6 is negative 7. Okay, so negative 1 and negative 6 work for me. I will bring down the 6z squared and plus 1. Remember, my goal here is to split negative 7z into negative 1z plus negative 6z. Okay, so there we go. We split negative 7z into two terms. I'll go ahead and bring all this down again so that way I can group them. Also notice, just a reminder, I put the plus in between, right? That's just to make it easier to keep that negative with that 6. Okay, so we'll group together the first two terms, and we'll group together the last two terms. And let's pick out common factors. So 6z squared minus z, those both have a common factor of z. Okay, so if I divide both of these by z, well, if I divide 6z squared by z, I'm left with 6z. And if I divide negative z by z, I'm left with negative 1. Now, negative 6z plus 1, they don't really have a common factor except for 1. But since this is a negative, I will factor out a negative 1. Negative 1 will be my common factor. If I divide u by negative 1, I'm left with positive 6z. And if I divide this by negative 1, I'm left with negative 1. All that equals 0. Now, I have common factors. This term and this term have a common factor. 6z minus 1. Okay, 6z minus 1 is a common factor, so I'll go ahead and write it on the outside here. Now, anytime I take out a common factor, I'm essentially dividing it out, right? So if I divided that, I'd be left with just z And if I divided this one by the common factor, 6z minus 1, I'd be left with negative 1. So there we go. We have it factored. 6z minus 1 times z minus 1 equals 0. Okay, well, the zero product property says that I have two factors. If I have two factors that multiply together to be 0, then I can take each individual part and set them equal to 0. The 0 is hiding somewhere here or here. We just got to figure out what z's make those turn into 0. So 6z minus 1 equals 0. Cancel out the minus 1 by adding 1 to both sides. Okay, that constant term is canceled out on the left side. And 0 plus 1 is 0. Now let's get rid of the 6, right? You can eliminate a factor like 6 by dividing by it. That gives me z equals 1/6. Now the next equation is a little bit easier. Z minus 1 equals 0. I will get rid of the constant term by adding 1 to both sides. Those will cancel. Z equals 1. Okay, so my two solutions, 1/6 and 1.